So in today's video essay, we're going to be exploring the history of tarot, and we're also going to be looking at this from a gender and class lens as well. So we're going to be exploring some of those themes in today's essay. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so to intro you into this topic, a tarot deck is a collection of 78 intricately designed cards that have undergone a remarkable transformation since its inception in the 15th century. By the way, my notes are down here, so if you see me looking down here, that be why. Okay. Initially designed for a leisurely card game, often in the form of like bridge, that's what tarot cards were usually used for, with the major arcana being like trump cards and the minor arcana being your stereotypical playing cards. Tarot evolved into a tool for divination and spiritual introspection. Alongside this evolution, the use of tarot cards has also faced its fair share of social scrutiny and criticism, revealing deep-seated gender bias and classist undercurrents that continue to shape the way that tarot is used today. By tracing the historical arc of tarot, what it was made for and how it was intended to be used, and comparing that to how we use it today, we might actually be able to interrogate some of these stereotypical beliefs about gender and class and social hierarchy, perhaps directing us towards an understanding of why and how we use it today, in a variety of different ways. So, the origins of tarot cards. Tarot cards originated in the 15th century in Italy, and it was known there as tarocchi. These cards were initially used for games like bridge and involved no mystical or spiritual connotations of any kind. It was simply just a card game. The major arcana were just trump cards to the minor arcana, which were standard cards, just the same as any old sort of playing deck that you would have today. The images on the cards were inspired by a lot of medieval and Renaissance-y art and social stereotypes and philosophy. By the 18th century, however, tarot cards had kind of undergone a cosmetic reshaping into a new direction as European mystics, particularly in France, began to interpret the cards as tools for divination and esoteric purposes. Figures like Anton Quart de Gebelin and Eliphas Levi infused the deck with occult meanings, aligning it with astrology, alchemy, and Kabbalistic traditions. So essentially, a lot of people at the time, not really a lot, but there were a few individuals that tried to essentially connect tarot reading to ancient Egypt. And even though there is no evidence to support that, and their essay was kind of debunked, someone else heard that and took it and ran with it and also made it into something spiritual. And by that point, just because these sort of two essays had kind of been made, it started to completely reshape the way that we as a society viewed tarot cards, especially in the Western world. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, as humans, we are supposed to evolve and change and look at things differently and revamp things. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's just good to know both interpretations, and both of them are valid, and both ways that tarot is used. As highlighted in Empowered Journalism's article, which I will include in the description box below along with any other resources that I mentioned today, tarot's mystical adaptation coincided with broader trends in European esotericism, reflecting a historical tendency to repurpose cultural artifacts for spiritual and intellectual exploration. So, tarot's spiritual rebirth, let's get into that. So, the 20th century witnessed the complete rebirth of tarot as a spiritual tool, especially with the creation of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot in 1909. This was designed by Arthur Edward Waite and was illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith. And this deck emphasized sort of universal archetypes with rich symbolism, making tarot more accessible for personal and collective reflections. In contemporary practice, tarot has sort of become a tool for means of navigating through life's difficulties and, you know, feeling more hopeful about the future and reflecting on yourself personally. And it also helps to foster introspection and create a strong sense of community with those who use it as well. For example, in HuffPost's article, which was very interesting by the way, definitely go check that out after this, but they sort of went on to explain how this professional tarot reader's experience in a bar revealed how tarot serves both as an entertainment source and also a conduit for meaningful connections, even amidst social skepticism about its validity. So essentially, to sum up, this tarot reader was hired by the bar owner to be an in-house tarot reader for, you know, customers. Because obviously this is her job and that, you know, she has to do what her employer tells her to, they sort of encouraged her to go around to tables or like to the bar as well, and kind of go up to people and see if they want a tarot reading. And that could be a reason, one reason, for why she faced a lot of criticism when doing this. You know, a lot of people were very rude to her and said she should be ashamed of herself, and were very cruel because they felt like she was kind of manipulating them or trying to scam them, and she had sort of like come in and she was using this bar's establishment to like make money when actually she was like a hired member of staff there. And on top of that, tarot reading, just like, you know, going to the cinema and watching a movie or reading a book, is just another source of entertainment that you can purchase. And so the criticism was very much unfounded and unnecessary. And what she experienced while sort of working at the bar was that a lot of the times, a lot of that criticism came particularly from men, and I'll get into why that is later. And when she did have people who wanted a tarot reading from her, a lot of the times it would be a heterosexual couple, with the woman being very invested in the tarot reading and wanting the tarot reading, and the male in the partnership being ambivalent towards it. Despite all these negative experiences though, she had a really good time with the people who were receptive to the tarot readings, and they really took it as just like a bit of fun and a bit of entertainment, and that's how she delivered it as well. But you can read more about her experiences in the HuffPost article, which I will include below. Despite the spiritual rebirth of tarot, it was not shielded from cultural critique. As a predominantly female-dominated field, tarot reading is often dismissed by patriarchal structures that undervalues women's interests. Articles like those from Stylecaster and HuffPost highlights how disdain for practices that women enjoy, or that is depicted as inherently feminine even though it's not, such as tarot reading, astrology and crystals, often stems from societal misogyny. These practices, often associated with women's empowerment and self-exploration, are trivialized in ways that parallel broader patterns of gender-based discrimination. Almost all male-dominated fields that eventually make space for women will eventually be abandoned and chastised as something feminine and therefore irrelevant by the very same men who once enjoyed those things or could still enjoy those things. So despite the fact that it was once a masculine thing, once it is seen as a feminine thing, all males abandon it. And the reason for this is definitely the patriarchal structure, which I'm going to break down as well, but essentially I'm going to use a couple examples to sort of make my point here. So take astrology for an example. Astrology was historically practiced, particularly in Asia, by men as a science, as a valid subject to study. However, this was promptly abandoned as a worthwhile endeavour when the westernization of horoscopes into a source of entertainment tainted the practice as a pseudoscience. So essentially this is to say that when, you know, horoscopes became more of a thing for entertainment and something a lot of women enjoyed, it then became seen as something feminine and therefore unimportant, and it changed from a science to a pseudoscience, despite the fact that, you know, like looking up at the stars at night and like coming up with a story in your head is just a form of creativity that has been around forever. So despite this, just the fact that it had sort of been adopted by women, this sort of practice of reading horoscopes more so than men, meant that it was no longer interesting or worthwhile. In Empowered Journalism, they make a really fantastic point. Definitely check out, if you check out any of the articles I mentioned today, check out this one, it was so interesting. But I'm gonna sum up what they said for you like here. They make a really interesting point about how fragile masculinity, that is to say those feelings in men that make them no longer want to engage in an activity deemed feminine by patriarchy, harms men so deeply and prevents them from growing and developing as humans. Fantastic article. So basically, they go on to say that because things like tarot and astrology and birth charts can be used as a tool for introspection and self-reflection, by the patriarchy deeming these things as feminine and something men shouldn't do, men who subscribe to patriarchal beliefs are missing out on a really key element of human development and growth, because the patriarchy often encourages men to change themselves physically without really thinking about how they should improve emotionally and intellectually. The patriarchy tells men that anything that you could use for self-reflection or introspection is inherently feminine because it is emotional and men aren't emotional. So the patriarchy is essentially trying to keep men as deficient as possible. The patriarchy essentially, with these beliefs, attempts to stunt men's personal growth and development to keep them believing in the patriarchy, because if they developed a higher intelligence, they wouldn't anymore. And so that means while women are reading these things like horoscopes, birth charts, tarot reading, and reflecting on themselves inwardly and doing that introspection and developing as a person, growing intellectually and emotionally, men who prescribe to patriarchal belief systems are not. Because it won't just pertain to tarot reading and astrology and all these things. It will be any type of introspection, any type of development like therapy and things like that. They will be told not to do these things. Take zodiac signs, for example. Okay, so I am an Aries. And so with an Aries, with every single zodiac sign, you'll be given good and bad traits about yourself. As an Aries, my good traits are that I can be really confident, really brave, really forward-thinking, go after what I want when I want it, be very ambitious, feel my feelings very strongly. But on the negative side, the Aries can be very angry, very violent, very hot-headed, very impulsive. They can give up on things that they find boring if they've done it for, even just 5 minutes and they're bored. They can just abandon projects really easily. They can be quite self-centered, although I personally think that is a good thing. And the reason I think that is because I've done introspection. So despite whether or not these characteristics are true and do actually pertain to you is irrelevant. The point is you've been presented with characteristics about yourself that you can pause and look at and go, am I violent? Have there been times where I wish I could have handled a situation differently and not been so mean or so cruel in that situation? Am I self-centered, or am I actually quite giving? Or do I feel like there are times where I could be more giving and less selfish? Or am I confident? Are there ways that I could improve my confidence? That is self-reflection. That is introspection. So that is something you're able to do because you looked up your zodiac sign and then you thought about all of those traits. In the same way, this is how tarot is used. This is how birth charts are used. You're reflecting on yourself when you use these tools. And so when these tools are deemed feminine and there are men who subscribe to patriarchal beliefs who do not feel capable of investing or believing in anything or respecting anything feminine, deemed feminine, even though it's not, even though femininity and masculinity have nothing to do with gender, because they don't want to associate with anything feminine, they're missing out on a really key, crucial, integral part of human development, which is also considering their emotional and intellectual development. And instead they're focusing 100% of their attention on their physical improvements. So the Empowered Journalism article goes on to say this, and I'm going to quote them, so I'm going to be reading this. The hatred directed towards astrology is a prime example of how patriarchy can negatively impact men. Toxic masculinity is a product of patriarchy, which can be internalized by men from an early age. It refers to traits of hegemonic masculinity, such as self-reliance and emotional repression, and how they result in socially destructive behaviors amongst men, often at the detriment of women. They may feel stigmatized if they express their emotions, loneliness, difficulties forming relationships, and the pressure to conform, which are all struggles men experience due to toxic masculinity. They go on to say that because of this, where women can see opportunities for growth and development and change that will be really valuable to them, men only see criticism. Because they're not used to introspection and self-reflection, when they hear people offer this advice or when they get opportunities to change, they get defensive instead and see it as just criticism. Birth charts expose men to the idea that they too are emotionally complex, which they may outright reject due to the misguided but widely perpetuated assumption that women are more emotional. The pressure to be dominant and self-reliant causes many men to reject perceived imperfections that can be highlighted by horoscopes. Where women see a chance to improve or change, men may simply see criticism. So yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting thing where this person was sort of saying that the patriarchy keeps men stunted in their personal development, especially emotionally and intellectually, so long as they subscribe to patriarchal beliefs, because there are, of course, loads of men who don't, who I've seen on YouTube anyways, doing tarot readings, actually engaging in things that are deemed feminine, despite what the patriarchy tells them to do or instructs them to do or encourages them to do. So they're kind of like, for those men, growth and personal introspection and then like developing emotionally and intellectually as a person, that's all on board for them because they're actually putting the work in to do that. Whereas the ones who won't do these things are probably going to get like left behind emotionally and intellectually for their life if they do not start self-reflecting. So it was just a really interesting connection that they made there with tarot reading. So if you want to go check it out after this. But after this video, you have to stay here because I told you to stay here. So yeah, you can't leave. Sorry, video's not over. So this can explain why tarot has taken on kind of cultural backlash and criticism, namely from men who engage in toxic masculinity ideologies, who simply cannot disobey patriarchy, which has falsely identified this hobby, along with many others, as feminine, despite the fact that there are plenty of men who, you know, don't subscribe to patriarchal ideas and genuinely value and enjoy tarot. So now we're going to be moving on to gender bias in tarot. So this is a little bit different. We're more talking about actual like gender bias within the tarot cards themselves. So essentially, the imagery within traditional tarot decks reflect historical stereotypes and gender roles. For instance, the Empress card embodies femininity, a nurturing nature and fertility, whereas the Emperor card represents, you know, integrity, control, good leadership, strength. And this is the Empress's counterpart. The same thing is true for the High Priestess, whose counterpart was originally the Hierophant, whereby that card is literally, the High Priestess depicts a woman literally doing this. Dead ass. It's like, this card is about being quiet, being meek, keeping your ideas to yourself, being intuitive, and you may have opinions and you may have feelings about things, but you're being urged to keep them to yourself and not really project them out into the world yet because you haven't got all the information. So it's about being much more introverted than extroverted. Whereas the Hierophant is this wise like philosopher who's going to impart his wisdom onto people. He's very extroverted, he's a community figurehead. So very, very different ideas going on when we've got cards that are depicted as feminine, cards depicted as masculine, and certain traits are given to those qualities and those roles that firmly put you in a box of gender conformity with the gender you were assigned at birth. With this knowledge of the original meanings of those tarot cards, we can still see those stereotypical gender dynamics at play. These archetypes, while not inherently problematic in and of themselves, when sort of paired together to differentiate subtle differences between men and women and gender structures, often reinforce binary notions of gender. And the same thing goes as well for how the trump cards work. So every female trump card is trumped by a male trump card. So it goes Page, which is often depicted as a woman, and then it goes Knight, which is often depicted as a male. Then it goes Queen, which is often depicted as a woman. And then it goes King, often depicted as a male. And this is why a lot of alternative tarot decks and modern tarot decks are being preferred now to traditional tarot decks, because a lot of people are challenging those norms and they are switching things up, and sometimes they're not even having, you know, Page, Knight, Queen and King. They're switching it out for something completely different, like, you know, frogs, bats, you know, hats and cats or something. And some people don't even have the Empress, the Emperor. Some people, again, they have animals to represent those cards. So there's a whole range of alternative decks that you can get out there that definitely don't conform to these sort of stereotypical gender roles. As the Typewriter Tarot explores in their article, contemporary practitioners are reimagining tarot by creating decks that challenge these stereotypes and embrace a spectrum of identities, including non-binary and queer perspectives. This reimagining represents a pushback against the rigidity of traditional representations and a step towards inclusivity. The Typewriter Tarot specifically mentioned that there's a deck called the Next World Tarot, which depicts like figures of diverse body type, ethnicities and genders, breaking away from sort of those Eurocentric and binary representations found in tarot decks that are traditional. However, tarot practitioners and enthusiasts still frequently face a lot of misogynistic criticism. As noted in the Reddit discussion R/2X chromosomes, which I'll also include below in the description box. The criticism often mirrors the disdain for other predominantly female-oriented hobbies, such as knitting and romance novels. This disdain reflects a broader cultural trend where women's interests are seen as frivolous or unworthy of respect, or unworthy of intellectual respect. The same dynamics are explored in this article. Absolutely loved it. It was so funny. But it was called How Women Are Ruining the World One Hobby at a Time. And it was satirizing female-orientated hobbies as unworthy of respect or attention. Classism and accessibility. So, in addition to gender bias, tarot has also been shaped by classist dynamics. Historically, tarot was like a luxury item for the elites, often used in courts. These were like intricately hand-painted items, so of course they took a really long time to make and they were very expensive. So it would be really rare that someone from a lower class or even middle class would be able to get their hands on them. But with the advent of printed decks, of course, tarot decks are now more widely accessible to a wide range of people, and they're also much more affordable. However, despite this, marginalized groups can still be excluded. So the professionalization of tarot reading can exclude marginalized groups for several reasons. As Bella Bell Wen said in their article, which critiques TarotTube, which is to say Tarot YouTube, the rise of sort of social media influencers in the tarot space often perpetuates exclusivity by prioritizing the aesthetic of the setup and cards as opposed to the actual value of the craft. So a lot of the times you'll see like the very, very popular tarot readers will have like, you know, a marble countertop and loads of like candles lit and loads of crystals everywhere, and they're wearing like 700 rings and bracelets and their nails are done, and like they've got like an array of decks. This isn't inherently a bad thing. Just to make that clear, this is not a bad thing at all. The sort of issue is that of course people are naturally going to prefer that. You've got like a nice aesthetic, so they're going to watch that, they're going to click on that, which also means that people who are really good at tarot reading but just don't have the finances to sort of have the extravagant setup and a wide range of crystals and decks are probably going to get like ignored and kind of pushed to the sidelines, and therefore kind of pushed out of being able to monetize on something that they have a natural talent for, unlike the wealthy who are able to monetize on something that they enjoy also. So in the tarot space, this often perpetuates exclusivity by prioritizing aesthetic and consumerism over authentic practice. This can alienate practitioners who are of a marginalized group and who cannot afford those sort of expensive decks or lavish setups, reinforcing those class divides. So I think something that's quite nice that I've noticed is that I don't know if this is because people can't afford decks or things like that, but people are finding ways to navigate around this, which I think is really lovely. But a lot of people are doing like tarot readings where they're doing it completely digitally, so they're just like getting an image off of Canva and having that in the thumbnail and being like, pick the image and then skip to the timeline and they'll do your reading with that image on the screen with no cards used. So people definitely are finding ways around the classism, but the point still stands that the classism is there and it's something people have to navigate around. Okay, the cultural resilience of tarot. So despite these challenges, tarot remains a resilient and adaptive practice. Its ability to evolve from simply a playing game into something that is used as a spiritual tool or a tool for introspection, self-reflection, or as something to use alongside your religion just goes to show its versatility and how it has survived and evolved through history. Modern tarot decks increasingly reflect a lot of diverse identities, making the practice much more inclusive. Moreover, tarot's embrace of marginalized communities, including the LGBTQ+ and people of color, underscores its role as a tool for empowerment and self-expression. For example, as noted in Red Brick's article, tarot's adoption by queer and marginalized communities reflects its potential as a safe space for exploring identity and fostering self-empowerment, challenging those traditional norms, and also helping to create like a communal space that's safe for everybody. My final thoughts. So the history of tarot is one of transformation, you know, from a card game to a tool for self-reflection, introspection, divination, religious practices. It has managed to embrace a wide range of diverse communities. Along the way, it has definitely been shaped by and responded to societal forces, including, but not limited to, gender bias and classism. I only spoke about those ones because those are the two that I'm most knowledgeable in, but there is definitely more that you could go into with tarot. By acknowledging these historical and cultural dynamics, we can appreciate tarot not only as a tool for introspection but also as a lens through which to examine broader societal structures. As tarot continues to evolve, it holds the potential to foster inclusivity, challenge stereotypes, and serve as a source of empowerment and entertainment, or as a divination tool for self-expression. It has become a versatile tool that has adapted through the ages to suit its various audiences. With the criticism it faces, using it can help to subtly fight the power against restrictive societal structures that try to box people into categories based on uncontrollable factors like gender, class, and race. By using tarot and supporting those who do, you could be subtly helping to break down rather than reinforce those limiting beliefs. So keep doing you and enjoy your hobbies. So that was my video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll try and post a video here every single Friday. If I can come up with ideas and write a whole essay within a week, then I will do that. But if you like tarot reading, feel free to go check out my other channel, which is called Tea and Tarot, which I'll also link in the description box below, where I also post tarot readings every single Friday as well. Thanks for watching. Bye!